I do hope you'll be able to hear that. You were able to hear that. That is a piece called Orage, or Thunderstorm, from Rameau's opera Platée, a comparatively early work. And it's just I thought it's quite an appropriate piece to play with the sort of weather we've had recently, but also as an introduction to the music of Jean-Philippe Rameau. Many of you may well be familiar with this wonderful composer, but many people may not. So I thought it might be interesting and helpful, hopefully, to say a few words about Rameau today. First thing to say is that he is an exact contemporary of Bach and Handel. He's the third of the big three late Baroque composers. And although it's very dangerous to kind of oversimplify it, and especially by nationality, it happens to be true, and you can't really get away from it, that Bach, the great Germanic composer, is very reminiscent of what you would expect a very Germanic composer to be. And Rameau is similarly very, very French, and does exactly what you expect a French composer to do of that period. One of the reasons why Handel is such an interesting figure, because of course Handel was born in Germany, grew up in Germany, and then moved to Italy in his young professional life, where he got interested in opera, and then of course came to England and really represented the most cosmopolitan of all composers up to that period. And he absorbed aspects of style from all over Europe, not just his native Germany, but from Italy and from France as well, from his travels. But today we're talking about Rameau. And when I say he's quintessentially French, what I mean by that is that he is concerned primarily with texture, with color, with dance, with expression, and with emotion. And these were all very important in French art and French culture in the early part of the 18th century in particular. So Rameau wrote a lot of keyboard music, he wrote orchestral music, he wrote ballet music, he wrote, of course, a number of very famous operas, but comparatively little liturgical music or choral music, which is one of the reasons why, as choral singers, we don't come across the works of Rameau very often. But it is fascinating stuff, and it's just amazing to listen to. I hope that little introduction that I gave you just now, if you could hear it all right, gave a very good idea of just how Rameau's music is very, very different from Bach or indeed Handel. There's a lot of virtuosity. There's a lot of emphasis on very, very rapid string writing and lots of colorful writing for woodwinds as well. and it tends to be very much in one camp or the other. Sometimes it's very, very quick and very rhythmic and very lively, and other times it's incredibly slow and very, very expressive, often very sad, very stately, full of ornaments, full of expression, full of emotion. And I think it's really important that our response to Rameau's music should be primarily an emotional response rather than an intellectual response. Last week, as you know, I was talking about fugue, and therefore Johann Sebastian Bach came up, obviously, although we talked mostly about an example from Mozart's Requiem based on the skills that Mozart had learned from studying Bach. But Rameau is a very, very different. If you find listening to very contrapuntal music too complex or not appealing in some ways, as I know some people do, some people think it doesn't have enough melody, doesn't have a melodic content that they can follow. Although it's interesting that Leonard Bernstein always said that the thing about counterpoint and fugues in particular is not that they don't have melody, they just have lots of melody, perhaps too much melody going on, too many tunes at once. And that may be true. But certainly in terms of Rameau, you don't get that complexity, you don't get that kind of intellectual aspect of the music. Instead, it's much more music of the heart, music of a direct emotional response to what he's trying to express. And that's one of the things that makes it fascinating and highly enjoyable. If you can get to a performance of Rameau when we're allowed to go to performances, or if you want to listen to some now, then I can certainly recommend doing so. And one of the pieces in particular is his opera of 1737, Castor and Pollux. Now, this is an incredibly complex piece, and it's worth saying that in Rameau's time, opera was very much in two camps. It was either comic or it was tragic. Very rarely do you get a mixture like you do later on in Mozart operas. In Rameau's operas, if they're classified as comic, then you could actually call them farcical or nonsensical or any other word you wanted to choose to describe them, because they're completely nuts and completely mad. On the other hand, the tragic operas of Rameau, one could subtitle as suicidal. They tend to be not just tragic, but so desperately sad. And Castor and Pollux definitely comes into that second category of the tragic, sad operas. I won't go too much into the story. It's immensely complicated, inevitably, and there are also two different versions, and the story actually changes quite clearly between the two versions. But to put it at its simplest, Castor and Pollux are twin brothers. Pollux is immortal and Castor is mortal. And they are both in love with a very beautiful princess, the Princess Telera, who unfortunately only loves one of them. And she chose Castor, who is the mortal one. And at the beginning of the opera, Castor has unfortunately been killed in battle. So the whole piece opens with a funeral, Castor's funeral. And one of the early highlights of the piece, as we shall see, is an amazing, sad soprano aria that the Princess Telera sings to her friend Phoebe, lamenting her deep grief at Castor's demise. But we'll come to that in a moment. Before that, obviously, as it's French opera, we have all the elements that you would expect of French opera. And this follows on from the tradition of Lully. And Lully loved the idea of having very complex scenarios, very complex librettos, but lightening the mood from time to time with dance. So dance is an almost prerequisite of French opera of this period. You had an overture, you would have arias, you would have choruses, and you would have dance movements. Very rarely do you get ensembles, duets, trios, quartets, etc. It's mostly solo aria. Obviously, you get recitative that moves the story on, but in general, the structure tends to be very much numbers, one number followed by another, an aria, a chorus, a ballet scene, and so on. But just to put this into some context, the overture is really important, because the French overture at this time of musical history, the late part of the Baroque, had become almost universal. You will recall, for instance, the beginning of Handel's Messiah. Call that dotted rhythm that opens Handel's Messiah, and then it repeats that very clear-cut, slow, dotted rhythm, and then you go into a kind of fugato. You remember how the overture of the Messiah goes. That is a typical example of a French overture. And in Castor and Pollux, Rameau does precisely the same thing. So he starts with this slow, very dramatic, lots of dotted rhythms. And so on. And you notice about that even in the second bar, we have this quite clear dissonance. Octave Gs, and then followed by this. And another harsh dissonance in the third bar. Quite typical of forcing these very, very dramatic, quite dissonant harmonies, even in the early stages, underlining the tragedy that's to come in this piece. And at the end of that slow, dotted introduction, he then goes into a fugato. Although it has a fugato element to it, it has these imitative phrases coming in one after the other. It's nowhere near an exact fugue of the sort that we were discussing last week. It's just using it as a simple musical device just to set the piece going. And for Rameau, he uses not just strings, but he's very, very fond of using wind instruments as well, adding color, adding an extra dimension. So for this piece, there are flutes, there are oboes, and very importantly, there are bassoons as well. And the other thing he does, rather than just extending the fugal idea and having an episode and then having the fugue coming back again, like we did like we were talking about last week, instead, he uses very simple melodic and harmonic devices. In particular, what's known as the circle of fifths. And by using that harmony, as long as you put one little tonal alteration, you can go all the way down, series of fifths, and you end up where you started. If you don't put that tone alteration in, it takes ages. You have to go all the way around all 12 keys before you get back to where you started. So just that little alteration, perfect fifth, and then an augmented fourth, and then another perfect fifth, perfect fifth, and that keeps you nicely contained within, in this case, the B flat major. So there are lots of those kind of devices. Comparatively simple harmonic ideas, but very, very conducive to the kind of expression that Rameau wanted to achieve here. And I mentioned near the beginning of this opera, you have this very famous aria. It's called Tristes Après, and it's sung as the princess is lamenting to her friend the death of Castor at his funeral. And here again, the simplest of musical devices. He just uses strings and several bassoons, all doubling each other. So the strings just play chords. And in between those chords, you have this delicious decoration provided by the bassoons, just playing broken chords. Still the bassoons providing the movement. Lots of suspensions, as we talked about. And at that point, the soprano comes in. The strings and the bassoons carry on. Again, simple chords, lots of sevenths, and at the cadences, suspensions. That's the whole of section A of this amazing aria. Section B is a slightly more recitative style, moves a bit quicker, it's quite short, and at the end of that, it just goes straight back to the A section again, an exact da capo, an exact repetition of the opening. So very, very simple structure, Very simple idea, but absolutely beautifully written. And if you hear it sung well, which it often is, it is absolutely stunning piece. I know that some of you have been listening and have taken an interest in this piece already, which is just coincidental. You didn't know probably I was going to talk about the Rameau today. But there is a very fine performance of that aria that you may want to catch up on. It's by Nadine Kucher, and she was a Cardiff Singer of the World. She comes from Belarus, this very fine soprano. She won the Cardiff Singer of the Year competition in 2015, I think it was. It's a beautiful, beautiful rendition, but incredibly slow. Rameau wrote very slow. He wrote long, but he wrote definitely 2 beats per bar, which is pretty much as I played it. So it's a very slow 2 beats in a bar with the bassoons playing crotchets, 2 crotchets per beat. In the Nadine Kucher version, you'll hear it's almost grinds to a halt, and the bassoons are actually playing what feels like 1 crotchet per beat. I'm not putting you off it. It's just very, very slow. And it's absolutely stunningly beautiful, and she has one of the most beautiful voices around today, but well worth listening to. But just to warn you, it is very, very slow if you're used to hearing it by other people. The other thing I wanted to say today is simply this, really, that if you can get hold of some way of perhaps a potted version or just some excerpts from Castor at Pollux, or indeed any of the Rameau operas, I think you'll find it very worthwhile to get to know a different composer from ones we're used to, and a composer that's full of absolutely amazing music of all types of style. And in fact, it's while I was listening to that aria that we've just been talking about, it reminded me of a song. I don't know whether you're familiar with this, a Michel Legrand, no less, song from the 1960s called How Do You Keep the Music Playing? And what's amazing about this is that not only is this piece, or this song, How Do You Keep the Music Playing, in many ways very, very similar to this Rameau aria. It's a very similar kind of harmonic and melodic style. And of course, the title itself is just epitomizes everything that we're going through at the moment. How do we keep the music playing? And the lyrics of the song, which I have here, I took the trouble to print them out. The lyrics of the song say, how do you keep the music playing? How do you make it last? How do you keep the song from fading too fast? How do you lose yourself to someone? And it's obviously it's a love song, but nevertheless, as well as being a love song, it finishes with these 2 very pertinent lines. If we can try every day to make it better as it grows with any luck, then I suppose the music never ends. I'll just read that again. If we can try with every day to make it better as it grows with any luck, then I suppose the music never ends. And of course, it's talking about love, but it just epitomizes everything that we're going through at the moment. And this question of how do we keep music playing is just everything for me at the moment. So to listen to this piece, this song, what I recommend, if you go on YouTube and put in Trinity College Choir, so Trinity College Choir, conducted by Stephen Layton, do this wonderful, wonderful a cappella version of this song with the mezzo-soprano Helen Charleston singing the solo part. And it's quite stunning. It's one of the most beautiful bits of choral singing you could ever hear, all done by the undergraduates at Trinity College, Cambridge. And Helen Charleston is a 3rd-year student, or was when it was recorded, and is obviously got a very bright future ahead of her as mezzo-soprano. But it's absolutely beautiful, beautiful singing and an amazing song. And I can only recommend it to you. I won't play it over this awful system because it will sound terrible and ruin it for you, but do have a listen yourselves, maybe on the headphones or something on YouTube, and I promise you, you will be impressed. So I think that's it for today. It's great to have this contact with you. I hope it's continuing to be of interest, and do let me know if there's anything in particular you'd like me to talk about or introduce to you, and I will see you again next week. Take care, everybody, and see you soon. Bye for now.